My name is Victor Coleman. A few months ago, I attended a funeral that changed my life forever. The strange thing is, it was my own funeral. Yes, you heard that right. I stood quietly among the crowd, wearing dark glasses and a hat so no one would recognize me, watching people cry over a coffin that was supposed to contain my body. My wife was there. My children were there. My younger brother was there. They all believed I was dead. Some people cried loudly. Some pretended to be heartbroken. But as I stood there watching them, I realized something painful. Not everyone was mourning my death. Some were celebrating it silently. You may be wondering why any sane man would fake his own death just to watch his own burial. The truth is simple. I suspected that the people closest to me were hiding dangerous secrets. And sometimes, the only way to know the truth about people is to disappear from their lives. But what I discovered after my death shocked me more than I ever imagined. Because the people I trusted the most were the same people planning to destroy everything I had built. And the day of my funeral was the day all their secrets came out. But before I tell you what happened at that cemetery, you need to understand why I decided to die while I was still alive. Because this story did not begin at my funeral. It began the day I realized something was terribly wrong inside my own home. My amazing viewers, thank you for your time and love. Please help this channel grow by liking and subscribing to my channel. God bless you richly. For many years, people believed I was a lucky man. I owned several successful companies. My businesses were growing every year. Money was not a problem. My house was large and beautiful. I had a wife, Vanessa, who people often described as elegant and charming. We also had 2 children, Daniel and Sophia. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. People often said, Victor Coleman has everything a man could ask for. But life has a strange way of hiding storms behind clear skies. Because inside that beautiful house, things were slowly changing. The first sign appeared one evening when I returned home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. As I walked toward the living room, I heard Vanessa talking on the phone. Her voice sounded soft and affectionate. But the words she spoke stopped me in my tracks. "Don't worry," she said quietly. "He suspects nothing." My heart skipped. She continued speaking in a low voice. "Yes, once everything is settled, things will be easier for both of us." I stood still, my mind racing. Who was she talking to? And what exactly did she mean? Before I could hear more, she ended the call. When I entered the room, she smiled warmly as if nothing had happened. "Victor, you're home early," she said. I nodded slowly. "Yes, I finished work sooner than expected." She walked over and kissed my cheek like she always did. But something about that moment felt different. As the old saying goes, when trust begins to crack, even silence sounds suspicious. That night, I could not sleep. Around the same time, problems were also appearing at my company. My younger brother Mark worked with me as a business partner. For many years I trusted him completely. After all, blood is supposed to be thicker than water. But recently some strange things had started happening. Large sums of money were disappearing from company accounts. When I asked Mark about it, he laughed it off. "Big businesses always have complicated numbers," he said casually. "You worry too much, brother." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was worrying too much. But something deep inside me refused to ignore the signs. Because experience had taught me something important. Numbers rarely lie. People do. Days turned into weeks, and the strange feelings inside me continued growing. My wife was becoming more secretive. My brother was avoiding serious conversations about the company. Even my children were beginning to talk more about inheritance and wealth. One evening I overheard Daniel speaking to his sister. "If father dies, the company will belong to us anyway," he said. Those words struck my heart like a hammer. I walked away quietly before they saw me. That was the moment something changed inside me. I began asking myself a painful question. Did these people truly love me? Or were they simply waiting for the day I was gone? One night I sat alone in my study staring at the city lights. My mind was full of doubts. Then a strange thought crossed my mind. What if I disappeared? What if everyone believed I was dead? How would they behave then? Would they mourn me honestly? Or would they reveal the truth about their hearts? The idea sounded crazy at first. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Because sometimes the only way to know a person's true face is to remove yourself from their life. Slowly, my decision became clear. I would disappear. The next day I visited my lawyer and longtime friend Mr. Harrison. When I explained my plan, he stared at me in disbelief. "You want to fake your death?" he asked. "Yes," I replied calmly. "That is extremely risky." "I know." He leaned forward. "And what exactly do you hope to achieve?" I looked him straight in the eyes. "I want to know who truly loves me." There was a long silence. Finally he sighed. "Victor, this plan may reveal more than you expect." I nodded slowly. "That is exactly what I want." 2 weeks later I announced that I was traveling for an important business meeting. No one questioned me. Traveling was normal for my work. Early the next morning I left home in my black car. But I never reached the airport. Instead, I drove toward a quiet river outside town. That was where the plan would begin. I left the car near the riverbank. The door remained open. To anyone passing by, it looked like something terrible had happened. Then I quietly walked away into the darkness. By the next morning, the news had already started spreading. Victor Coleman was missing. A few days later, the police made their conclusion. I was presumed dead. From a hidden location, I watched everything unfold. The news reports, the morning visitors, the whispers about my wealth. Some people cried sincerely, but others began discussing my money far too quickly. My brother Mark suddenly took control of the company. My wife Vanessa began acting strangely calm. Even my children started talking about dividing properties. That was when I realized something painful. My death had become an opportunity for some people. And as the elders wisely say, when a wealthy man dies, grief and greed often sit at the same table. The morning of my funeral arrived with dark clouds hanging over the sky. It was the kind of morning that made people whisper quietly and walk slowly, as if the air itself understood that someone important had died. The cemetery was already crowded when I arrived. I wore a long dark coat, a hat pulled low over my face, and dark glasses to hide my identity. To everyone there, I was simply another stranger who had come to pay respects. But in truth, I was the man they had gathered to bury. I stood quietly beneath a tall tree at the far end of the cemetery and watched everything. The large black car carrying the coffin arrived first. Behind it were many other vehicles filled with family members, business partners, and important guests. I felt a strange chill run through my body. It is not a normal thing for a man to watch his own burial. My wife Vanessa stepped out of one of the cars. She wore a black dress and large dark glasses. 2 women supported her as she walked slowly toward the coffin, pretending to struggle under the weight of grief. From a distance, anyone would believe she was completely heartbroken. She knelt beside the coffin and began crying loudly. "Oh Victor," she wailed, "why did you leave us so soon?" People around her began wiping their eyes. Some women murmured words of sympathy. But as I watched closely from where I stood, something inside me felt wrong. Her tears seemed too perfect, too rehearsed. As the elders say, the loudest cry does not always carry the deepest pain. A few minutes later my younger brother Mark arrived. He stepped out of his car wearing an expensive black suit. But instead of looking devastated, He appeared unusually confident. He walked around greeting business associates, shaking hands and speaking in a low, serious tone. I moved a little closer to hear what he was saying. Victor was a great man, Mark told a group of investors. But life must continue. He paused before adding something that made my stomach tighten. I will be taking over the company operations from now on. The men nodded respectfully. Of course, one of them replied. You are the natural successor. I clenched my fists. My body was not even in the ground yet. And already my brother was claiming my empire. That was when another proverb crossed my mind. Some people wait for a funeral not to mourn the dead, but to inherit the living. Soon my children arrived. Daniel and Sophia stood beside their mother near the coffin. At first they looked sad. But as the ceremony continued, I noticed something strange. Daniel kept whispering to his sister. Sophia occasionally glanced toward Mark while he spoke with business partners. At one point Daniel walked over to my brother. Uncle Mark, he said quietly. Yes, Mark replied. About father's shares in the company, we should discuss how they will be divided. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. The priest had not even started the burial prayers yet. And already my son was discussing inheritance. For a moment I closed my eyes. Not because I was angry, but because I was deeply disappointed. Sometimes betrayal hurts more than loss. Soon the priest stepped forward to begin the funeral service. Everyone gathered around the grave. The coffin was placed beside the open ground. I slowly moved closer until I stood among the crowd. No one recognized me. The priest began speaking. Today we gather to say goodbye to a respected man. His voice continued, but my mind was elsewhere. Instead of mourning my death, I was observing the truth about the people I had loved and trusted. And what I saw was slowly breaking my heart. As the priest continued the prayers, something unexpected happened. Vanessa quietly stepped away from the crowd and moved behind a large tree not far from where I stood. A few seconds later, another man joined her. I leaned slightly closer, pretending to adjust my coat. The man spoke first. Are you sure everything is under control? Vanessa nodded. Yes. And the will? She smiled faintly. Don't worry. Once the lawyers finish the process, everything will be ours. The man looked relieved. Good. Then he added something that sent ice through my veins. You handled Victor's disappearance perfectly. My heart began beating violently. So my suspicions had not been wrong. Vanessa had known more about my disappearance than she pretended. At that moment, anger began rising inside me like a storm. But I forced myself to stay calm. Because the truth was finally revealing itself. And the day was not over yet. The priest finished his prayers. 4 men stepped forward to lower the coffin into the grave. Everyone bowed their heads. Some people cried again. The grave diggers began throwing the first shovels of soil. The sound of dirt hitting the coffin echoed heavily through the cemetery. That was the moment I realized something important. If I stayed silent, my enemies would walk away believing they had succeeded. But if I revealed myself now, their lies would collapse in front of everyone. Slowly, I removed my hat. My heart pounded like thunder. The grave diggers lifted their shovels and began throwing soil into the grave. Each sound of dirt hitting the coffin echoed loudly in the quiet cemetery. People bowed their heads. Some women cried softly. My wife. Vanessa held a handkerchief to her face as if she could not bear the pain. My brother Mark stood beside the priest with his head lowered. To everyone there, it was the final moment. The moment Victor Coleman would return to the earth. But Victor Coleman was standing right there among them. Alive, watching, and the truth inside me was burning like fire. Slowly, I removed my hat. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. Then I took a few steps forward. My heart was pounding so loudly it felt like everyone could hear it. The grave diggers lifted another shovel of soil. Stop. My voice was calm but firm. The men froze. They turned around slowly, confused. The crowd murmured. Some people looked toward me, wondering who had interrupted the burial ceremony. I stepped closer. Stop the burial, I said again. Now the priest looked annoyed. This is a funeral, he said. Please show respect. I removed my dark glasses. Gasps exploded through the crowd like thunder. One woman screamed. Another man stumbled backward. The priest dropped the small book he was holding. Because standing before them was the man they had come to bury. Victor, someone whispered. My brother Mark's face turned pale like chalk. Vanessa's handkerchief slipped from her fingers. For several seconds nobody moved. Nobody breathed. They simply stared at me as if they had seen a ghost. Then someone shouted, "It's him!" Panic spread through the cemetery. People began whispering loudly. Some stepped backward in fear. Others stared at the coffin in the grave as if expecting it to move. I raised my hand. "Relax," I said calmly. "I am not a ghost." Silence slowly returned. Then my brother Mark spoke with a trembling voice. "Victor, how is this possible?" I looked at him carefully. The same brother who had already started claiming my company. The same man who had spoken about taking my position before my body was even buried. "I never died," I replied. The words hit the crowd like lightning. Vanessa shook her head slowly. That's impossible," she whispered. I looked directly at her. "No," I said quietly. "What's impossible is pretending to love someone while planning their downfall." The crowd began whispering again. Vanessa's face turned pale. "Victor, what are you talking about?" she asked nervously. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I turned toward the people gathered around. Friends, business partners, employees, neighbors. "I owe all of you an explanation," I said. "This funeral was part of a test." The murmuring grew louder. "A test," someone repeated. Yes, I took a deep breath. For months, I suspected that people close to me were betraying me. My eyes moved slowly across the crowd. So I decided to disappear. To see what would happen if everyone believed I was gone. A heavy silence fell over the cemetery. Then I looked straight at Mark. And what I discovered was deeply disappointing. Mark forced a weak smile. "Brother, this must be some misunderstanding." "Really?" I interrupted. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small folder. "These are copies of company transactions from the past 6 months. Mark's face instantly changed. "Millions of dollars transferred into accounts under your control." The crowd gasped. "Victor," Mark stammered. But I was not finished. Then I turned toward Vanessa. "And you?" Her lips trembled. "What about me?" I looked at her quietly. "Who was the man you were speaking with behind the tree just now?" The cemetery became completely silent. Vanessa's eyes widened in fear. I don't know what you mean." I shook my head slowly. As the elders say, truth may run, but it cannot hide forever. Then I said the words that froze her completely. I heard everything. The man she had been speaking with earlier slowly began backing away through the crowd. But several people had already noticed him. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, stepped forward calmly. "Please stay where you are," he said. The man stopped. The entire crowd was now staring at Vanessa. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Mark looked from her to me in panic. All eyes were fixed on Vanessa. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. The man she had been speaking with earlier stood frozen, like a thief caught in daylight. My brother Mark wiped sweat from his forehead, his confidence completely gone. And I stood there, watching everything I once called family fall apart before my eyes. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, stepped closer to the strange man. "Sir," he said calmly, "it would be better if you stayed." The man looked around nervously. There was nowhere to run. Too many eyes were watching. Too many ears were listening. Finally, he swallowed hard. "My name is Andrew," he said quietly. The crowd murmured. I looked at him sharply. "Andrew who?" I asked. He hesitated. Then he glanced at Vanessa. That one look said everything. Vanessa quickly turned her face away. I asked a simple question. I said, my voice now colder. "Andrew who?" "Andrew Blake," he replied. "And what is your relationship with my wife?" I asked. The question landed like a bomb. Vanessa shook her head quickly. "No, Victor. Please." But Andrew interrupted. We've been seeing each other," he confessed. Gasps filled the air. Some people covered their mouths in shock. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Vanessa's knees almost gave way. "You promised you wouldn't say anything," she whispered harshly to him. Andrew looked at her helplessly. "There's no point hiding it anymore," he said. I looked at Vanessa, the woman I had trusted for years. The woman who had cried loudly beside my coffin just minutes ago. "How long?" I asked quietly. She began shaking her head. "It's not what you think." "How long, Vanessa?" My voice was no longer loud. But it carried something heavier than anger. Truth. Tears filled her eyes. 2 years, she whispered. The words hit harder than anything else that had been said. 2 years. While I was working, building, trusting, she had been living a completely different life. As the elders say, the deepest wounds are not made by enemies, but by those we trust. Before anyone could recover from that shock, I turned toward Mark. "And you," I said slowly. Mark tried to compose himself. "Victor, listen." "No," I cut in. "You will listen." I held up the documents again. "These are not mistakes. These are not business risks. This is theft." The crowd grew louder. Mark's voice began shaking. "I was going to return the money." "When?" I asked sharply. He had no answer. "Because there is a point where lies run out of breath. And truth takes over." Then I turned to my children. Daniel could not look me in the eyes. Sophia had tears running down her face. "I heard you," I said quietly. Daniel looked up. "Heard what?" he asked weakly. "Talking about my death. Like it was an opportunity." Silence. Pure silence. That was all they could offer. Because guilt speaks loudest when words fail. The crowd was already overwhelmed. But I had one more truth to reveal. One final piece that would shake everything. I took a deep breath. "Everything that has happened today," I began, "was part of a test." People leaned closer. And this test did not start when I disappeared. Their expressions changed. It started long before that. I turned toward Mr. Harrison. He nodded and stepped forward. Then he spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "Months ago, Mr. Victor Coleman rewrote his will." The crowd gasped. Mark's head snapped up. Vanessa's eyes widened. Daniel took a step forward. "What do you mean?" he asked. Mr. Harrison continued. "He created a condition." "What condition?" someone asked. I answered this time. "If my death revealed greed, betrayal, or dishonesty from any member of my family." I paused. Every eye was now on me. "They would receive nothing." The words exploded like thunder. "Nothing," Mark repeated in disbelief. I nodded slowly. "Everything I own has already been transferred." "To where?" Vanessa asked desperately. I looked at her calmly. "To a foundation that helps people who truly need it." The crowd erupted. Some people clapped softly. Others whispered in shock. Mark staggered backward. "You can't do that," he shouted. "I just did," I replied calmly. Vanessa fell to her knees. "Victor, please, we can fix this," she cried. I looked at her one last time. "Some things cannot be fixed," I said quietly. Mark tried to speak again, but no words came out. Daniel and Sophia stood frozen, realizing everything they had hoped to inherit was gone. The empire they had already started dividing had slipped through their fingers. As the old saying goes, greed often digs a hole deeper than the one meant for others. I looked around the cemetery one final time. At the coffin, at the grave, at the people who had gathered. Then I said calmly, "Today, I buried something." People listened carefully. Not my body, I paused, but my past. With that, I turned and began walking away, leaving behind the grave that was meant for me, and the people who had revealed their true selves. The cemetery slowly began to empty. People left in silence, whispering about what they had just witnessed. A man who attended his own funeral. A family exposed before the world. A truth that could no longer be hidden. The wind blew gently across the open grave that was meant for me. But the real burial that day was not of a man. It was the burial of trust. Vanessa remained on her knees long after everyone had left. Her tears no longer sounded dramatic. They were real now, painfully real. The man she once trusted, Andrew, had quietly disappeared from the scene. Because when trouble comes, false love is always the first to run away. Mark sat alone on a bench nearby, his head buried in his hands. The confidence he once carried was gone. The empire he thought he would control had vanished like smoke. Daniel and Sophia stood at a distance, unable to move closer. For the first time in their lives, they understood something important. Wealth can be lost in a moment, but regret can last forever. As for me, I did not look back. Not that day, not the next, not ever again. I left everything behind. The house, the memories, the people. And for the first time in many years, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Peace. I moved to a quiet place where nobody knew my name. I lived simply. No titles, no noise, no pretenders, just life. And in that quiet life, I learned a truth many people never understand. It is better to live with honest strangers than with deceitful family. Months turned into years. Life moved on. But for those I left behind, life was not so easy. Vanessa lost everything she once depended on. The comfort, the status, the security, all gone. She tried to rebuild her life, but trust, once broken, is not easily restored. As the elders say, a cracked mirror may still reflect, but it will never be whole again. Mark faced legal battles for his actions. The same cleverness he once used to manipulate others could not save him from the consequences of his choices. Daniel and Sophia struggled the most, not because they lost wealth, but because they lost respect for themselves. They often remembered that day at the cemetery, the moment their father stood before them alive, and they had nothing but silence to offer. Years later, I visited that cemetery again. This time, not in disguise. I stood quietly beside the grave that was once meant for me. I looked down at it for a long moment. Then I smiled faintly, because that day had taught me something no amount of money could ever teach. That not everyone who stands with you truly stands for you. That loyalty is tested, not assumed. And most importantly, that character is revealed when opportunity appears. As the wind moved softly around me, I spoke quietly to myself. Some people lost me because they thought I was gone. I paused, but in truth, they lost me because they showed me who they really were. What's the lesson here? This story is not just about a man who attended his own funeral. It is about life. It is about choices. It is about the consequences of the heart. Because in this world, greed can destroy what love builds. Betrayal can ruin what trust protects. And one moment of dishonesty can cost a lifetime of blessings. Let this be a lesson to everyone. Value people, not just what they have. Be loyal, even when no one is watching. And never trade your integrity for temporary gain. Because as the elders wisely say, when the truth finally arrives, it does not knock, it breaks the door. And that was the story of the man who attended his own funeral. The end. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Your time means the world to me, and I don't take it for granted. Every view, every like, every comment, they encourage me more than you can imagine. I pray that as you support me, God will support you too. May favor find you, may joy never depart from your life, and may all your dreams come true. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Stay safe, stay blessed, see you next time. Bye bye.